Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LCK week number 2 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. If you are interested in checking out the videos that we've done on the LCK up until this point, that's the week 1 overview and analysis, the preseason power rankings video that I did before the summer split started. You can check out the playlist up on the iCard, but today we are going to be going over everything that happened in week number 2. I'm pretty excited. The LCK does seem like it's going to be a bit more interesting in the summer split than it was in spring. I'll be honest, spring was, a little bit boring. It was very chalk. There just weren't a lot of upsets. There weren't a lot of interesting storylines. The teams that were supposed to be good were good, and the teams that were supposed to be bad were really bad, and, we didn't really get a lot of parity in the league. I think that looks to be, I'm not going to say changing indefinitely, but it certainly looks like it's not going to be nearly as cut and dry as it was in the spring split, which is a good thing. But let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. And let's get right into it. I don't want to waste you guys' time too much. If you are new to the channel, what we're going to do here is go series by series each day, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover. And at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow here for week number 2. I will also, of course, be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 10, giving you guys an idea of where I think these teams are landing right now, just as a disclaimer that I will also put at the end of the video. As I always do, those power rankings are, who I think is better. It's not just reflective of the standings. If you want to see what teams are doing better right now and what teams have played better in the games that have already happened, you can look at the standings for that. If you want my prediction on what teams that I think will be good by the end of the year or moving forward into the next couple of weeks, that's what the power rankings are for. And so just kind of a disclaimer there, because I've gotten some comments on that on other videos over the course of this split. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. It is going to, of course, start with day number 1. The LCK always starts with day 1. Everybody starts with day 1. I don't know what I'm talking about. And kicking off day number 1, an undefeated versus winless team matchup, as we saw Nongshim RedForce taking on the Kwangdong Freecs, and KDF moves to 3-0. They moved to 6-1, a 2-0 win here for them. Really, really good stuff. This team has started off the summer split incredibly hot. It feels like they finally found a solution down in the bot lane. It felt like they were getting close to that in the spring split, at least closer than they had been over the past year or so when they had been playing Taiyun and really not having any success down in the bot lane. Really, no matter who was in it, Taiyun or Ondil or Jun or whoever was in that position, it just didn't really end up mattering. But Bull came in, obviously, in the spring split. It was pretty good. Started off really hot, cooled off a lot as we continue to move along into the spring split. But Leaper now has come in and has really dominated the start of the summer split. He's going to get player of the series once again. I think this is a really, really good landing spot for a young AD carry. I say young, he's not ridiculously young, but he is a player that is very inexperienced at the pro level. Remember, he was plucked out of streaming, not out of like an academy system to come here and play for KDF. He was formerly a trainee for a couple of different teams, but this is not somebody who's been playing professionally all that recently and really has never played professionally at any stage above being like an actual just trainee in the system. And so really was an inexperienced player and somebody who didn't really have a lot of expectation, especially for me. But this is a great landing spot for a player like that because you have stability around him. You have the top side of the map of Dudu, Cousin, Bulldog, who are going to be just fine. And Ondil is a solid enough support. That means this team can actually just play for him. They can all sacrifice in other different ways because they all are a lot more, versatile. And they can allow Leaper to kind of be a resource carry. They can let him have as many resources as it takes to let him feel comfortable, and that's exactly what they're doing. They are funneling a lot of their attention and a lot of their resources into him as a player, and generally I think that that is a really good idea to do with a young player. It's why when, you see a bad team take somebody out of solo queue and just immediately try to make them work, it never really works because they don't get the kind of resources they need to adapt to the pro level quickly. But when you see a good team do that, oftentimes it is a bit more successful because they actually have the infrastructure and the resources to make sure that that player is in their comfort zone before them, slowly opening them up to more complex topics and hopefully growing them into a pretty good player. Leaper has started strong. I'm not going to call him elite or anything just yet. He's been funneled a lot of resources by this team, but he's doing really well with those resources, and that definitely deserves an up. Ondil has also been really good, and we've seen this before. Ondil tends to play really well at the beginning of splits and sometimes, falls off. That's kind of been the trend here. I don't know if that's going to happen. Leaper might be the one to kind of unlock Ondil. He's kind of just been waiting for a support, or an AD carry, I should say, that can be consistent really in any respect. Hasn't really had that at any point in his career, so maybe Leaper can be that, and if Leaper is that, maybe Ondil can have a full split of being really good, but that is still to be determined. I thought Dudu was excellent here. The Dudu Din Din matchup is always funny, you know, the little the inverse there, but Dudu always wins it. Like, he always destroys this matchup. Din Din kind of gets destroyed by everybody in the LCK. I still see people holding out hope that he can be a good top laner. I don't think it's going to happen. I've been out on Din Din for a while, and Dudu is a player that is a bit of a channel darling. He's a really talented top laner. I don't think his 2024 has been as good as his 2023 or 2022 were, but it's still been good, and his team is better now, and likely that's the reason why, is he just doesn't have the same kind of resources that he's been having the last few years on some bad teams. But Cuz and Bulldog have really nice chemistry. I think Bulldog has settled in to this nice role. He has really become very stable in the mid lane. I don't know if that's always a good thing. Again, I really want to see that aggressive Bulldog that we knew from his first split in the LCK come back out every once in a while, but this is a very stable, very consistent player, and I think that that is adding value to KDF, and Cuz has been very good at the start of this split as well. The bot lane improving has really unlocked them because the rest of this team was already really good, and so having a good bot lane just means that they are now more complete. And then for Nongshim, it's not good. It's not looking good for Nongshim right now. They're 0-3, 1-6 to start this split. Not that that's entirely surprising. We knew this team wasn't going to be particularly competitive. I said that it was a bottom 2 in the LCK in my pre-split primer. That has absolutely been true, bro, and Nongshim are just worse than everybody else. But we kind of saw that coming, and it's just a bit unfortunate. Credit to them. They actually stuck with a 5-man roster for the entirety of this series, and that's something they haven't been able to do, and so at least they're trying to find some sort of consistency, even if the players aren't playing perfect, and I think there are real criticisms to throw out about some of these players. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Fisher in the mid lane. He was actually generally fine in week number 1. I don't think he was the biggest weakness on this team by any stretch. I think Guger was definitely worse. I think Sylvie and Din Din were definitely worse in week number 1, and Fisher just kind of was there. He was just along for the ride and wasn't really helping the team, but this was the series where it's like, oh, this was EDG Fisher. Like, this is the Fisher I remember getting absolutely destroyed in lane, having no impact, playing super passive, just not really being a competent mid laner. And if that's going to be the case, that's a disaster for Nongshim. They don't really have a competent mid laner. Maybe Calyx is that. I've been hearing a ton of hype about Calyx, and trust me, I watched the Challengers League. I see it. Like, I see Calyx dominating, but we've done this before. He would be the 3rd mid laner in a row to dominate for Nongshim in the Challengers League and then come up to the LCK. The other 2 have not done well at all. Fiesta was the first one who came up with this big Nongshim like roster revolution, and he was awesome in the Challengers League. I think some people forget just how good he was in like 2021, 2022, that time frame, and it was not good last year. He was one of the worst players in the LCK, and then they gave another shot to another player who was dominating the Challengers League in their own system, Call Me, who came up and was probably even better than Fiesta in terms of his Challengers League performance, and just wasn't, it might have even been worse at the LCK level. It's not worked out for these mid laners who are doing well, so I get it. There is a lot of hype around Calyx, and I'm there with you. Like, I love watching the tape. It looks really good, but the precedent has been set that Nongshim mid laners are going to dominate at the Challengers League level, get called up to the LCK, and be absolutely atrocious. And that's just unfortunate that that kind of is the expectation for me now, but it's certainly something to watch out for. The rest of this team didn't do anything, by the way. It's not just Fisher. Guger is not good. He is not a good enough player for this level. Din Din kind of got destroyed by Dudu. I know some people see upside in him. He played Skarner, and he still got absolutely blasted. It's not really a good sign. Sylvie had some very aggressive plays. He was certainly looking, I think he's at least trying to do things, even if he doesn't have the skill to execute on them, and Jiwoo is obviously hard stuck on this team trying to create. And so for Nongshim, they're just not very good. They don't have the talent to keep up with other teams. And for KDF, they are really good. I mean, 3-0 is probably a little bit of an overestimation of their current abilities. Their schedule has really not been all that difficult, especially in hindsight, and the bot lane really has yet to be tested in any meaningful way. I mean, KT Rolster is a nice win, but that's looking worse and worse, as we'll talk about later on in this week. But, you know, I gotta see what happens when they start playing teams that are above this skill level, because now they've proven that they are not just another team. They're not what they were in the previous split, which was a borderline top 6 team. This is a playoff team that, you know, maybe has the potential to go even higher than that. And then moving on to our second series of day 1 here, and it's a top-of-the-table clash between 2 pretty good teams right now. T1 taking on Dplus KIA, and T1 is going to pick up the 2-0 win. They're going to walk away feeling really good about this performance because DK really was hot. Coming off of week number 1, they looked really good against actual good teams, beating Hanwha Life, beating KT Rolster. Those are big victories that got them all the way up to number 3 in my power rankings. 2-0 was a very strong start with a tough schedule for them, but that schedule did not get easier at the start here as T1 was their next opponent. They are eventually going to play some bad teams, I promise, but T1 with a really nice rebound after getting slaughtered by Gen.G in their series. This wasn't quite as clean as a 2-0 would indicate. Game number 2 was a slaughter, but look at DK's draft in game number 2. Like, truly what was supposed to happen in that game. In game number 1, honestly, DK has no excuse for not winning. Like, they threw that about as hard as you could have in that instance. So not really the cleanest series in the world from T1. They did what they were supposed to do, but this is more DK losing than T1 winning, at least in terms of the way that I would analyze this. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series, though, is going to go to Owner. He has been really strong to start this split. I say in the 2 series that they've won. Obviously, everybody looked bad. In the Gen.G series, everybody got completely outclassed, but Owner has looked really good in their 2 wins so far, and I hope that keeps up, man. Owner just needs to be somebody that is actively contributing to the generation of resources for this team. That's always been my biggest criticism of him, is that he is kind of a secondary player to everybody else on this team. I've always said that I don't know how Owner would do if he was taken off of T1 and put in a different situation. If him and Cuz switched, like, teams and situations, do I think Owner would be nearly as good on KDF? I don't really know. Like, I genuinely don't know the answer to that question, because Owner doesn't play super fast and aggressive in the early game, and that might just be the team's style. This team is generally a lot slower. Faker has always been somebody who is a little bit slower. KIA wants to play the 2v2, and so it makes sense for these players, for Owner, to take a little bit of a step back. In terms of his early fighting, it's just something that I find very important in terms of the modern jungle meta, and T1 really just doesn't do it. How much of that is Owner? How much of that is T1? I don't know, but when Owner is allowed to go out there and play, or when Owner does step up and go out and, like, really win the mid game, he looks excellent when he does it. He's just not consistently doing it. So I just want to see more of this. Like, this is what I want to see. I want to see the aggressive plays. I want to see him play Sejuani and constantly be everywhere around the map, constantly fight for everything once he gets a lead. That's what I want to see. He pulled back game number 1. He certainly was probably the biggest advocate for winning game number 1 on T1's side, and then obviously game 2, they just kind of slaughtered DK, and he was a big part of that as well. So easy choice for player of the series. Faker obviously was excellent on the Tristana in that second game and was very important on the Corki in the back half of game number 1. I wouldn't say as important as Owner or even Zeus were in that game. I think that they were very valuable, but Faker's game 2 on the Tristana was definitely noteworthy. Guma, KIA, Zeus, all of them looked good. I don't really know what's happening with Twisted Fate. It feels like teams are very scared to pick it against T1. Not really sure if Zeus is just obliterating people on it in scrims, but whatever the case, it's not working for the teams that are picking it against him, because Zeus clearly is feeling very comfortable playing into things like TF. So for T1, it's an important win to get themselves back on track, and for DK, not a good loss. Like, this was really not something that you felt good about, especially coming off of such a good week number 1. I think that there was a lot of momentum in your favor. There was some progression from some players, namely Lucid, that you were really excited about in week number 1, and that didn't really translate at all here into week number 2. Lucid's going to get done of the series. The 2 Nidalee games were both pretty atrocious. He obviously fell off super hard in game number 1, but then first picking Nidalee in game number 2, only for the draft to not complement it at all, and for him to get completely out-jungled in the early game. It's just an utter disaster. I know some people are going to look at the KDAs and say, like, how can you blame Lucid? Why is Kingen not dud of the series? Why is Kellen not dud of the series? But truly, when you watch the tape, there is nothing that is less impactful on this map than the Nidalee in game number 2. And in game number 1, it's not like he closed it out well. Like, these are some of the problems that I saw in Lucid in the first split in spring. The reason I was a little bit lower on him is he can also sometimes have a little bit of a lower impact on the game overall. He sometimes plays a bit scared. Now, when he is confident and aggressive, he looks good. He has the mechanics to keep up with a lot of other great junglers here, but when that isn't happening, he's not exactly a star player on a game-to-game basis. Showmaker was really good, as per usual. Showmaker has been great at the start of this split. He was great in spring as well. He is just as good as he has been in the last 2 years, and aiming is also playing really well. Right now, at least surviving, he's playing within the structure of the system really well, but DK is going to struggle in terms of talent going up against the best teams in the world. I think that that is just, unfortunately, the case of it. Lucid has a very good matchup into Canyon because he has played against him a ton in these scrims, and he clearly knows him very well, but when you're playing teams as talented as T1 and you don't have that mental advantage, Lucid has really struggled in those matchups. He struggled against HLE in the spring split, obviously did much better at the beginning of this split, but he struggled against T1 as well in the spring split, and those are the matchups that you simply have to win if you want to be a team that gets close to competing for a world spot for DK. I still think that's more than attainable for them. This loss doesn't kick them out or anything, but I want to see it. And then for T1, a great bounce back, great rebound, but again, I want to see you control the pace of the game. I don't want to see the enemy team lose it and throw it into your hands. I want to see you grab it and take it. I guess they kind of did that in game 2, but look at that draft. Of course they did in game number 2. So still a lot for me to learn, I guess, about T1 before I feel like they are the conquering dominant force that we know that they can be, but their floor is so high that at worst they're a top 2 team in the LCK. Then moving on now to day number 2, and we kick day 2 off with what was supposed to be an interesting matchup, one of Gen.G's only losses this year. It's KT Rolster taking on Gen.G, and Gen.G rights that wrong. They go 2-0 in this series, they move to 6-0. This team is genuinely unstoppable in this meta. I don't even know what you're supposed to do against them. They just win every lane. Their macro is perfect. Like, they make no mistakes in the mid game. They are more talented than you. They are smarter than you. They are quicker than you. Their communication is clearly excellent. Like, I don't know what you're even supposed to do against Gen.G. KT, obviously, the only team to take a best of series off of Gen.G over the course of this year at any point. Gen.G has not lost a best of 3 even in the regular season to anyone else. It was just KT Rolster in the regular season, and that's not working out for them right now. That momentum train has certainly come to a screeching halt. We've always talked about this team being finicky, very much not having any sort of consistency, but this is taking it to a whole new level. 0-3, 1-6 to start the split is about as disastrous as it can get, although some of those matchups are a bit more difficult. They really have not played a particularly easy team just yet. They've not played any of the bad teams, which I think is at least some consolation prize for them, but, you know, I'm going to keep it short about Gen.G. There really just isn't a lot to talk about when it comes to this team and when it comes to how good they are, because they are just so much better than everybody else that they are playing against, so much better than everybody else in the world at the current moment. It makes it so hard to really evaluate not only them, but a lot of other teams. Like, how strong is the LPL? How strong is the LCK? Well, everyone kind of got bodied by Gen.G, and so I don't really know how strong anybody in the world is right now in comparison, because they are just winning that hard. And that's a credit to these players. It's all 5 of them. Like, I don't want to give any one player more credit than the next, because I do think all 5 of them are dominating. In this series in particular, Lehens is going to get player of the series. Obviously, the Leona game in game 1 was good, but the Blitzcrank was very flashy in that game number 2, and honestly, he was a gigantic playmaker. When you give Lehens something that he can go out and be the primary initiator on, he's going to look like one of the best players in the world. KT Rolster knows that intimately when he won MVP for them last year. Also, not to be that guy. I really don't like being that guy on this channel, but sometimes I do have to be that guy, just in terms of acknowledging how things have gone. Ignoring the past is not generally a great thing to do. I received a bunch of comments on my off-season video when it came to the LCK in December. If you want to check that video out, I highly recommend it. That video has aged unbelievably well, and the comments have aged. They've certainly aged in one way, but I received a ton of comments that were blasting me for saying Lehens was like somehow just as good as Delight, if not better. Like that was somehow some unbelievable take that I had after this guy was coming off of an MVP split. You know, same thing for Keen. I got some comments where it was just like, Keen's not in the same realm as Zeus, and it's like, I don't really understand where we're supposed to go with this. I got a ton of comments about how Chovy shouldn't be an A+ player. Again, Gen.G, we knew they were going to be this good, or at least anybody who knew these players knew that they were going to be this good. The only questions I had, and the only thing I got wrong about this team in terms of what I predicted in the preseason, was Canyon. I did not know he was going to be this dominant. Like, I expected him to be good, but this is prime Canyon. Again, like, we are just getting it again after 2 years that I would say were a little bit below expectation. 2023, 2022, neither of those years were particularly dominant from Canyon, at least in terms of his expectations coming off of 2020 and 2021, which are some of the best years we've ever seen of any player ever. And so to see him get back to that, it's just astounding. Keen goes deathless on Cassante and Udyr. Ridiculous. Chovy's doing 1 billion damage on reworked Corki in the mid lane. Like, it's just not fair. Gen.G is not fair. They are a cheat code right now, and it's working. KT Rolster on the other side. There is so much wrong with this team. I really don't like this draft. I think the Sedge-Yone combo is fine, generally speaking, but you do kind of have to be better than your opponent to pull that off, at least at a high level. BDD has not been particularly great over the course of this year. I don't think he's been horrendous. Like, there have been mid laners that were really highly touted going into the year that have really sucked. I think someone like Xiaohu over in the LPL comes to mind, where it's just like, oh, you fell off a cliff. BDD has clearly been worse than he was last year, but I don't think it's been by like a ridiculous margin. He's just kind of been an average LCK mid laner, which is certainly below expectation for him, but it's Chovy. You're not going to win if you're BDD in that matchup. It's just not going to happen, and Pioshik has really started off this split slow. He's going to get dud of the series here. He is obviously the most important player on this team. I don't even think that that's even up for debate. When Pioshik wins, this team wins. When Pioshik loses, this team loses. It really is that simple. That's just Pioshik. That's every single team he's ever been on that was DRX, that was Team Liquid. It's all of it, right? And, you know, especially since that 2021 year where he was like the only veteran on a super young DRX team. Like, it's just never been the same for him. He's had that carry mentality ever since, and even on things like the Sejuani, he is going to get himself into positions where he's either really winning or, in this case, entirely useless. Like, he's throwing away games with his decision-making, oftentimes not even available for fights because he's just not there. Deft and Barrel have also started started very slow. Def's aggressiveness has kept up from the spring split, that big jump that we saw, but the talent has not been there. He's not been able to win consistently. It has been against good bot lanes, so I'm not going to freak out just yet, but Beryl definitely returning back to earth, I would say, after kind of a good spring split. I know that feels weird for anybody who maybe hasn't watched the channel, but Beryl is traditionally horrible in the regular season. That's kind of always been Beryl's thing since he's left Damwon, like every year of DRX, obviously the last year in particular, but 2022 as well, even when they won Worlds. He was great at Worlds. He was really bad in the regular season. That's just always been who Beryl is. You just kind of have to live with that. And Perfect, I'm glad that he's healthy and back in the lineup, but he can't salvage this. KT Rolster just is not a good team. Like, this is not a good team in their current state, and Gen.G is simply too good of a team to ever falter in a situation like that. This is their revenge, their first series back against KT since that loss, and they made them pay for it. This was a dominant 2-0. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and it's another really interesting one to talk about. It's FearX taking on DRX, and DRX picks up a really huge victory for themselves in this one, going 2-0 in the series to move themselves to 2-1 and 5-3 on the split. This might be the best non-playoff team at the current moment, and hell, with KT Rolster really struggling, I don't know, man. Is DRX like a top 6 team in the LCK right now? I don't think so, but you know, it's certainly a more interesting conversation than it has any right to be. We had a lot of these players doing a lot better than, you know, they had been doing at the beginning of the year. Their projections were definitely more favorable than their results have definitely indicated, but they're starting to figure it out. I think the changes that they've made to this team have made them better. I think obviously, you know how in love with Plata I am. Like, I don't have to go over that again. Plata is, you know, the channel darling at the current moment, the player that I'm kind of going out the most for, but all right, I gotta say it, man. Teddy popped off. This is what I've been waiting for. This Teddy, where has this been for the last 3 years? And I get it. Like, people are going to continue to say that, oh, this has been him the whole time. I think it's really different when you watch how he played the Kai'Sa in particular in Game 2. Ashe was good in Game 1, but that was more of the team effort, the traditional Teddy performance of, I'm going to play really slow, really safe. I'm not going to do a whole ton in the early game. If my team gets ahead, I'm going to do really great in the mid game to really transition that, and I'm going to be a really stable team fighter. I'm going to win the game for my team so long as they give me the resources to do so. But Game 2 was, no, I'm going to get my own resources, and then I'm going to pop off in these team fights. That Teddy has not been here. That Teddy really has not been consistent at all throughout his career, and that's why I've always been a bit more critical of Teddy. I've gained a reputation, I would say, on this channel of being a bit of a Teddy hater, and I'll take that. I think that that's a fair thing for me to have. I'm not going to try to push back and say, actually, this whole time I've actually been positive of Teddy. No, I feel like I'm definitely lower on Teddy than the public consensus. I think generally the phrase I've always used is, he is a more mechanically talented Patrick. Like, that is who he is as a player, but Patrick can have games like this, you know? Teddy can have games like this. You can pop off if the situation is right. He dominated this series. He truly was by far the most important player, and I do think this is the best he's played in the last 3 or so years. I continuously see people talk about, you know, all of these players that he's been elo stuck with. One of them being Bertle, by the way, who's like a top laner in the LPL right now, but all of that to say, if this Teddy shows up more often, that narrative's out the window. I am on board. I will happily be the biggest Teddy fan in the world if he plays like this for the rest of the split. This is just more of an outlier, at least in terms of what I've seen from the tape. I do think Plata deserves a lot of credit. I know that feels like a little bit of a cop-out, but man, his Leona was so good in game number 2. He was really, really active on it. Execute has really struggled at this level. He has not been a particularly good support, and Plata really just outplayed him at every single phase of the game. He is somebody that I'm really looking at as a breakthrough star. Anybody who follows the channel knows that. Yehu is actually really solid. I think he has been the biggest addition that this team has had over the course of this year, is going from Satab to Yehu. I think that has been a major upgrade for DRX, because not only is he surviving in the mid lane, he is actively helping a lot of the plays that they want to make. He is a little bit more of that stable bend don't break mid laner, which can sometimes lead to him getting overlooked because he's not exactly the flashiest player, but his mechanics are really solid, and he's always there for his team. Sponge has gotten better since Yehu has been in the lineup. That's become clear. And Frog, you know, he really struggled in week number 1 after being put in, but maybe give him some time and maybe see what he can do, because Rascal was not doing it. Rascal has been horrible for essentially 2 years in a row now, and Frog is definitely somebody that at least has some upside. Really happy to see him continue to get this shot after a bad showing in week number 1 and actually come through and make it worthwhile. He was good in this series as well. DRX looks solid across the board, but Teddy, please bring this out more often. I just want to see that killer instinct. It's not the mechanics. I think some people are going to get that twisted and say like, oh, he didn't just decide to play well. Like, he's always had this. I agree. Like, mechanically, it's never been a mechanics next problem with Teddy. It's always been I want to see him play like he wants to be the one to carry the game instead of play like he wants to be the one to let the others carry the game. That kind of thing. You get it. For Fox on the other side of this, it's unfortunate, but I have to give Raptor dead of the series. He was by far their best player in week number 1. I saw a lot of people saying like, oh, Raptor has always sucked, and that's just not true. Raptor's a really interesting prospect. I do think there is valid criticism in this team benching Willer for him, as I've stated in both of the videos I've done on this channel already this split, but Raptor was horrible in this series. Nidalee is a complete bait pick if your name is not Canyon, and the Vi was also just as bad here in game number 2. And it wasn't just him. Like, Clear has just not really been able to keep any sort of form in the LCK. He's been this guy, this super hyped up LCK Challengers top lane prospect from DRX, and it's just never really been able to click. We've seen so many Challengers League players get super hyped up and never really find any sort of consistent success at the LCK level. As I've said on multiple occasions, the gap between the LCK Challengers League and the LCK is the biggest gap between a tier 1 and a tier 2 region anywhere in the world, and I don't even think it's remotely close. Execute continues to really disappoint me. He has been bad at the LCK level, which is really unfortunate because he was so fun in the LEC, but it's just not translated. Henna is Henna. I'm never going to be excited about Henna. And Closer, honestly, is playing generally fine. He's been better this split than I think he has been in about a year and a half. It just doesn't really matter because the rest of this team is kind of struggling. And if Raptor doesn't win, then jungle mid doesn't really matter. So DRX looking good, Fox looking bad. And that's a really good sign for DRX. Like I said, with KT Rolster really struggling right now, there is kind of suspiciously an open spot here in the middle of the standings for DRX to potentially push themselves into. If they can keep this form up, if Teddy and Playtech can really become like a genuinely good bot lane and the rest of this team can stabilize, I think DRX could be a top 6 team. I don't think it's likely to happen. I think that obviously you would assume that other teams could get their shit together before DRX could, but right now they're going to be in that conversation and they've earned it through their first 3 series. And then moving on now to day number 3, our middle day here in the LCK, and we kick it off with a matchup between Hanwha Life Esports and OK BRION that HLE is pretty easily going to be able to win. This was, I guess, a theoretically fun series. Game number 1 was at least kind of competitive, but come on, like HLE, if they had lost this, it would have been complete disaster panic mode, but nice bounce back here. They beat the worst team in the LCK by a considerable margin. I don't know, Nongshim is kind of contesting them for that right now. Bro at least has 2 game wins, but HLE looked so much better in this series. They really did dominate across the board. I think there's really only one lane where you're like, could have maybe expected something a little better, but the lane matchup itself went really well. It was just maybe some performance, issues, and we'll talk about that. But player of the series, very luckily, is going to go to Peanut. He was kind of poor in week number 1. I honestly was very surprised by the output he had because he's been really good all year long, and obviously he's Peanut. He's been great for, like 6 or 7 years in a row now. There are some people, I've talked about this in the comment sections of not only my videos, but especially a lot of the other, conversations surrounding the LCK that talk about how Peanut and Doran were clearly the problem. Peanut and Delight were the problem. I think that is an oversimplification of the problem, of the issue at hand for Gen.G over the past couple of years. Obviously, it's results-based thinking, which, if you're a follower of the channel, you should know that I'm very actively against, and I would hope that you guys would also agree with that sentiment. I'm a data analyst in my real job, and my day job, as you guys know, and so, results-based thinking is certainly not something that I want to go towards. I think just because Gen.G couldn't win with Peanut and Delight, that doesn't mean that Peanut and Delight are bad players that aren't good enough to win with. I just think it's really hard to get a team better than what Gen.G has right now, and clearly the synergy that those players have together is insane. You don't win 3 titles in a row with Peanut in the jungle in the LCK if you're not one of the best junglers in the world. So seeing Peanut bounce back here, I'm a big Peanut believer. He looked excellent here, and back on comfort. Like Sejuani, that's the thing he does well. Like not just Sej, Maokai, Poppy, like those are the things we know him for. He can play carries. Obviously we saw more of that from him at the beginning of his career, and he can still do that, but he is a lot more comfortable now on the initiators and just kind of using his influence to control the map because his macro really is the best in the world out of all the junglers. So, really good to see him bounce back here, but Delight was also tremendous. It was the other former Gen.G player, at least one of the other former Gen.G players on this team that played well here. Delight was excellent. I think the Poppy in game number 2 was definitely a bit of a standout performance. Polu was a disaster in week number 1, and we'll talk about him as we go further along. He does not look like he's even remotely LCK caliber in terms of what he offers in the support position, but, Delight bouncing back as well. Not a great week 1 from him either, so nice to see him perform well. Viper and Zeka were good in week number 1. They were definitely the strengths of the team. Viper in particular had a pretty good week number 1, so I'm not shocked to see both of them play great. Zeka going deathless is always a very good sign for a really aggressive player like him, and then the only player left to talk about is Doran. Kind of a tale of 2 games here from Doran, but I think for the most part, people forget that Doran actually probably was their best player in week number 1. He was really tremendous last week. He was winning lanes super consistently. consistently. It's just the rest of the map actually wasn't all that good. Peanut and Delight in particular, like I said, were pretty bad for this team in week number 1. And Doran, while he wasn't dominant in spring, he's another player that, because he's a top laner and because he's been on good teams his entire career, I think has gotten a significantly worse reputation than he deserves. He had the best year of his career last year by a gigantic margin, was legitimately at times the number 1 top laner in the LCK. I wouldn't say for the entire year, but certainly for periods of 2024 or 2023, not 2024. And I think that that's a really, important thing to recognize, is that he's only like 6 months out from being one of the best top laners in the league. He can get back to that, and he was really good in week number 1. So HLE dominating across the board, it's a good sign. And, their only lane that wasn't dominant was top lane, but even then it still was dominant because Bro's top laner Morgan was horrible here. Lord Morgan not playing up to his standard. This was a dud of the series nominee easily. Like, this was a horrible, horrible, horrible performance from Morgan. Truly one of his worst as a pro. 2 games of Skarner, one of the most broken champions in the entire game at the moment, and he got absolutely blasted on both. Was constantly in bad positions, was taking fights that there was just no way he was ever going to win. I don't know what happened to Morgan in this series. I'm going to be honest, this was very out of character for him. It's not that he doesn't lose. He's not a perfect top laner. I don't rank him in the top 4 or anything like that for a reason, because I do think he has his flaws individually as a player. He's going to lose, especially against players like Doran and like, HLE's Macro, who are, they're really good at that part of the game. But he lost way harder than he had any right to in this matchup, and I think that that is definitely a bit of a disappointment. Obviously, Envy and Polu are a disaster. Envy's actually been fine, generally speaking, at the start of this split. I feel a bit bad for him because he has been really kind of playing the best league he's played in a while, probably ever since the Sandbox days here on Bro, and everybody else on this team has been a disaster. Polu is horrible. Like, he is probably the worst player in the LCK. I think there is definitely, a conversation surrounding that debate. There are a lot of players that are vying for that title right now, which is unfortunate, but Polu might be leading the conversation. The dude is just not an LCK caliber support. And then Young Jae and Karis, they're whatever. Like, Karis has been fine at the start of this split, but another player who just doesn't particularly excite anyone. And then Young Jae, a player with a lot of good upside, just, he's not going to be able to beat Peanut, especially if Peanut is playing well. So Bro losing, not a surprise. Bro losing 0-2, really not a surprise. I still think this is the worst team in the LCK, and HLE getting back on track is important for them. Just getting that confidence back, getting their ability to, know what they want to do back, I think is huge for them. I just need them to play up to their own standard. We saw what they could do in the playoffs. They beat T1 in a best of 5. They beat them cleanly in a best of 5 in the playoffs last split. This is a team that could easily be top 2 or somewhere around there in the LCK if everything were to go right. Hell, they can make World Finals. Like, that is the upside. They could win Worlds. Like, if everything goes right for this team. They're not quite there yet in terms of, where I think their ceiling could be, but hopefully this is getting them closer. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and it's actually a pretty good clash between some teams that have been winning. It's T1 taking on the Kwangdong Freecs, and T1 is going to pick up the 2-1 series win in pretty traditional T1 fashion. It's the exact structure that we've come to really expect from T1 best of 3s in the regular season, where they lose game number 1. Everybody's talking about how washed they are, about how horrible 1 or 2 of the players on the team are, and how Faker can't carry these goons to another victory. Game 2 is incredibly close, and T1 is able to pull it out in the end, and then game 3 is an utter slaughter, and T1 makes it look like it was never close after all. It's such a predictable formula at this point that I will have to imagine we get this 4 or 5 more times in the regular season as we continue to go along, but talking about this series in particular, it's the formula to a T. Now, the players that really didn't stand out, I think, are a little bit more surprising. Like, KIA was probably the worst player on T1 in this series. He wasn't good in game number 1. He's the player that kind of got called washed by the community after game 1 because T1 fans are notoriously very patient, aren't they? Jokes aside, KIA is obviously fine. He was much better in games 2 and 3, just didn't play a great Leona game in game 1, and I think that threw some people off, but he was really good down the stretch of this series, but everybody else definitely had their moments. Player of the series for me is going to go to Faker in the mid lane. I feel like I've kind of snubbed him on a couple of other ones over the start of this split, so I wanted to give him one here. You could make the argument that, Owner or Zeus or Guma could be player of the series here. I think this was much more of a team effort across games 2 and 3 than it was like one player just being given the keys to carry, but I think Faker was probably the most consistent. He plays the Ahri in game 2, everybody freaks out, $500 Ahri skin, doesn't use it, plays base Ahri because it's Faker, he doesn't use skins. I don't know why people thought he would use it. Of course he didn't. He used it on stream later in Arena, that's a lot funnier, but Faker was great in this series, especially on the Corki in game number 3. I think that was one of his better games of the split up until this point, and it really does show that he can lock in whenever he needs to. He has been excellent all year, and hopefully those issues that he had at MSI, not only in terms of performance, but hopefully in terms of health, are behind him. I don't know how realistic it is to say that, but at the very least we can hope. The rest of this team is also very good. Zeus, how do you give him Skarner 2 games in a row? He's one of the best top laners in the world, and you give him the strongest champion in the top lane 2 games in a row, and all of a sudden you lose. That sucks. Owner was really good, especially in game number 2 on the Viego when he actually was given the ability to carry. In the late game, those fights are a lot more difficult if Viego's not getting those resets. I know Viego Ari as a duo isn't exactly the scariest one in the game, but it should be. It certainly should be in the conversation. You land one charm and, Viego's off to the races in a team fight. And then Guma, man, you give him some protection in game number 3. You give him the ability to, team fight front to back on the Zeri, and he pops off. Like, he looks really good in these 5v5s. I'm really starting to buy into the Gumayushi hype train. I think he's been really good over the course of this year. I'm not going to say I've ever been out on Guma. I think I've always been a little high on Guma, but again, the player I've always compared him to, I think these two are very, very similar. Him and Gala, I think they're like the same player. One's in the LPL, one's in the LCK. It's really the only difference. I think they're both incredibly talented. So, nice win for T1. Unfortunate loss for KDF, but not one that I think that they were, not expecting to have. I think they went into this expecting to lose this series. They put up a good fight. Again, games 1 and 2 were relatively competitive. They had a good early game in game 2. They played really well in game number 1. They just couldn't end up closing out the series. Big shout out to the solo laners who were unbelievably good in this series. Bulldog was awesome in game number 1 on the Tristana. This is becoming a must ban against the Kwangdong Freecs. And Dudu, hell yeah, nice series from Dudu. Great week from him. I think generally speaking, again, I just want to see this all the time. Like, he has not been that game breaker that he has been the past 2 years so far in 2024. He still has that in him. He can still be a top 2, top 3 top laner, not only in the LCK, in the world. Like, that's the kind of mechanical upside he has as a player. I think more people would see that if he was on a better team. He has not been on a better team, and so he doesn't necessarily get that recognition, but this guy's cracked. Trust me, like, if he were given a bigger opportunity, people would be talking about him in that way, but he was awesome in this series. Leaper and Ondel started to, show some of their weaknesses, I would say, in this one. Leaper definitely got exposed a bit. Pulls out the Talia in game number 2. Not really sure what that's all about. It's a very crazy pick into Kalista Nico, and boy, howdy did it not really do anything in the back half of that game, and then obviously the Kaisa Leona was just completely outclassed. In game number 3, Ondel's gonna get my dead of the series. Ondel's always been a player that's looked worse in their losses. He's good from ahead, bad from behind, and that really sucks when your AD carry is not playing well. It's funny, I think Ondel is one of the supports that I would most apply this tag to in the world. He is like super reliant on the form of his ADC. If his ADC is winning, Ondel's gonna look great. He's gonna play super aggro, he's gonna play forward, and it's gonna look great. If his ADC is losing, not only is he gonna go out there and int, like, that's something that we see out of a lot of other aggressive supports, but he actually just like turns off. Like, he stops trying to make plays. He is entirely reactive in terms of his play style. I think that will hold him back from being an elite level support, but again, if you give him a good bot lane partner, I think he'll be just fine. But for KDF, this was an expected result. No, you're not going to go undefeated this split, but I don't think anybody was expecting that, losing to T1. Certainly not the end of the world, and T1 with a really nice win. They moved to 3-1. This is a fine situation. Your only loss so far this split is to Gen.G, and that's the team you were supposed to lose to. They look good, maybe not perfect, but good enough right now, and T1 always gets better as the split goes on, so I'm really not worried about them. Now moving on to day number 4, our penultimate day here in week number 2, and it's a kind of bottom of the table clash that is a bit of an upset as we saw Nongshim RedForce take it on DRX, and Nongshim is going to pick up their first series win of the split over a DRX team that looked like it was finally starting to put the pieces together. This is always how it goes. One team looks okay, they start to figure things out, and then, oh, here comes one of the worst teams in the league. That's the exact time for them to lose. We have just been getting a little bit too comfortable in terms of some of these bottom teams, and this was just another cold reminder that the bottom of the LCK is still garbage and is still very, very bad. I will continue to say it. Teams like Nongshim, bro, Nongshim won here, but like, are these teams even top 8 in North America? Like, truly, there are some real issues with them, but I guess we should probably talk about the games, huh? DRX losing has some merit behind it because there is some gameplay to look at and analyze to determine where it went wrong. For Nongshim, where did it go right? Well, player of the series for me is going to go to Sylvie in the jungle. He is really influential in whether or not this team succeeds or fails, and I know that that's kind of just the case with jungle right now. You've probably noticed the trend so far this week here on 14-12, where, the jungler who wins is probably going to win the series, or the jungler who is doing more damage. If you can play Brand in game number 3 the way Sylvie played Brand in game number 3, it's not really going to matter what else happened in that series, then it's basically instantly over. He's going to be dealing a billion damage every single second, and that's why Sylvie is getting player of the series here. He was generally fine in game number 1 and game number 2, but Brand was so utterly utterly dominant in Game 3. There really was no other way to stop that champion. That, yeah, he has to get player of the series. He was the most important player in the series. He gapped the opposing jungler Sponge, and that's the end of the story. Like, AP junglers have created this circumstance where instead of mid lane really being the centralizing force that it was in the spring split, it's turned into jungle. It's by far the most important role in the game right now. At the pro level, it's not even remotely close, and when you do get those carry champions, when you are able to pop off in team fights, that's the end of the game. Like, that, they're game-ending threats right now in the jungle, and I just don't think we've been getting that elsewhere. So credit to Sylvie, again, rather inconsistent as a player, but the upside was there in the Challengers League. He's finally starting to figure some of that out after being given another shot after a rough rookie year last year. I like that decision. Big shout out to the rest of this team as well. Fisher, Jiwoo, Guger. I think those three in particular also played great. Like, Fisher was really solid in this series. You know, Yehu's a more than capable mid laner, and, you know, we've talked about his ability to just survive in laning phase and not really create problems for his team. I think that was true here, but Fisher was definitely better than him in terms of actually creating positive plays for the team, which is big, and Jiwoo and Guger were definitely the better bot lane in this series. Teddy and Plata were really poor, and we'll talk about that as we go further along. Definitely frustrating to see that after them coming off of probably their best series as a duo earlier on in the week. If there is a concern, it's that Din Din still doesn't do anything in the late game. Really good laning phases from Din Din. You know, that's great. Frog's not a good laner. I think that that's something we're definitely learning here. Still probably about as good as Rascal was, but Din Din, he doesn't do anything with any leads that he gets. He's just kind of there. So shout out to Nongshim. They actually played really well here, and I think there's a lot of positives to take away for DRX. This is bad, man. Like, you come off of a pretty big win over Fox, like a super winnable series here against Nongshim, and you just kind of shit the bed. You look really bad, and things don't go your way. I think jungle bot was definitely a bit of a gap for the enemy team in this series, and that's not ideal. Dead of the series is going to go to Sponge in the jungle. He was this team's biggest problem in the spring split. He was a disaster for them, truly one of the worst players in the LCK. He's been fine to start this split, but, you know, the upside is definitely starting to get less and less clear. I think, you know, the drafts are definitely a part of that, but the Xin Zhao in Game 3 didn't look particularly good, and so not a lot to hang your hat on. Teddy and Plata, like I said, came off of maybe their best series as a duo, Teddy's in particular, and just played really horrible into Nongshim. They looked better in Game 2. Like, you can talk about Game 2 actually being fine for them. I think Teddy did well on the Zeri, but Games 1 and 3 were not good, and, you know, a lot of this series was spent talking about Nautilus lore and not about any of the gameplay because Teddy and Plata were doing nothing down on the bottom side of the map. It's definitely disappointing. Frog got obliterated in laning phase. Like, this guy is just not a very good laner. I think he is an okay team fighter from what I've seen at the LCK level so far, but if you can't survive lane, you're not going to be useful. In the LCK, there are too many good laners, especially in top lane, and Yehu, like I said, survived, but really wasn't doing anything good for this team. We wanted some active, positive traits coming in from DRX, and I just don't think we got that here. We got a lot of the negatives, and I think that that's very disappointing to see a team that did feel like it was starting to figure some stuff out in terms of playstyle just revert back to the negative traits of the previous split. But for Nongshim, at least they're not going to go winless. They're now sitting at 1 and 3. This definitely makes them not the worst team in the LCK. I still don't think their ceiling is better than like 8th at best, but you know, they'll take that considering how they played in the first couple series. They were flirting with 10th, like an easy 10th, and so I think this win is definitely going to feel good. And then moving on to our second series here of day number 4, and a decently interesting one here between FearX and Dplus KIA. DK is going to be able to take it 2-0. We kind of saw this coming. DK is the better team, and they performed like the better team in this one. Luckily, they were able to bounce back after that loss earlier this week to T1, but this was an expected result. I think the scorelines honestly look a bit better than maybe the gameplay was. I don't think they played bad. I think Game 2 was incredibly good from them. I think that they were really solid. They just kind of obliterated Fox in Game 2. Game 1, Fox had a lot of fighting spirit. They came out and tried to do something. You know, I'm really not going to sit here and say that I was unimpressed with Fox, but, you know, DK was just straight up better, and that's definitely a bit of a problem for a team like Fox that doesn't really have the talent to overcome that. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Showmaker. Now, looking at the KDAs, that might be a bit shocking for some people because Aiming went 25, 4, and 15 in this one, but Aiming is a bit of a KDA merchant. At least on DK, he has been a bit of a KDA merchant. He has tried his best to be as irrelevant as possible in these games, show up in the ending, get all the kills, and I respect him for that, but Showmaker was the best player in this series by a large margin. Aiming was still good. I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle in terms of Aiming's performances. I think he has been very good for this team. He's still been a positive for them overall, and yet I don't think he's been nearly as good as his KDAs generally would suggest, but Showmaker is really solid. He is one of the best players in the LCK at the current moment, and I don't feel like that should be really all that surprising to anybody who watched him last year. I was really high on Showmaker in 2023. I was kind of high on him in 2022 as well. I was a big defender of the performances he was giving. I feel like Damwon fans, very similar to T1 fans, shout out you guys, you're very spoiled in a positive way. You've had a lot of success, and so when your team is like third or fourth, you're just instant like pull the trigger, get them out, and Showmaker I think was receiving a lot of criticism for that when I think that there were a lot of problems outside of his control with the team, and generally speaking, I think he was by far the best player on Damwon over the past few years. It's good to see that finally start to get rewarded with him having some teammates step up around him, most specifically Lucid, who is starting to play well. There's no other way to put it. Outside of that T1 series, Lucid has been excellent. The first 3 series of this split have been brilliant from Lucid. He's been one of the best junglers in the league so far, and this is kind of what we saw from him in the playoffs as well. Again, if that trend upwards that we saw towards the end of the spring split is real, if that's something that's going to be replicable for Lucid for a longer period of time, if that's him realizing his potential, that's massive for DK and their ability to be one of the better teams. That was why I moved them up to number 3 in my power rankings. That was all predicated on the idea that Lucid is now a top 3 to 4-ish jungler in the league, which I think is a pretty realistic thing to say. Aiming and Kellen were really good. Aiming was excellent. Kellen was really good. Kingen was solid. Everybody on DK did their jobs, especially in that second game, which felt like everybody was just winning and just really clicking, and that was kind of a top team kind of performance. I just wish game 1 was a little bit cleaner. And then for Fox on the other side, I've completely given up on Execute. Like, I am at the point now where it's like, I loved him in the LEC, I loved him on Astralis, but whatever is happening here on Fox is not working out. He has genuinely been one of the worst supports in the LCK, and honestly, the bottom tier supports have been horrible. I think more so than other regions, bottom tier supports in the LCK have really kind of stood out in a negative way, and Execute has definitely been one of them. He has underperformed my expectations in a giant way. I think that generally speaking, Rakan, first of all, in game 2, like, what are we doing? Kaisa Rakan on 14-12, like, it's just not the move. It's not the play. There are 5 to 6 better engaged supports right now than Rakan, and I like Rakan. Like, he offers a lot of bonuses that other champions don't give, even if he's not exactly the strongest in the meta, but there are just some times where it's not going to be worth it, and you were never going to have priority in lane. You were never going to be as useful as Alistar outside of lane, or even the Vi or the Gnar or anything like that. Outside of the lane, you weren't going to be able to move around the map and be creative because you've got a Kaisa, and you need to really babysit her, and so just not really a lot going on for Execute. It just didn't feel like a good series, and it's not been a good year so far on Fox. I think, obviously, playing on the team doesn't help, but playing with Hanwha also doesn't really help. Like, I want to make that clear as well. Hanwha is not a particularly strong player, and I think that is definitely affecting Execute in that way, but, his performances have to be better. I think Raptor really struggled this week. Clear, Closer, they struggled in this series. I think, generally, Closer still continues to be the player that's probably performing the best on Fox, but it's not by a lot. This team's 1-3 for a reason. They don't look good. They're in the bottom cluster of teams right now. They are with, teams like DRX and Nongshim. They are closer to that than they are to a team like KDF. That is very, very clear at this point. And then for DK, hopefully this team can consistently stay a top 3 team. That's kind of just what we've been waiting on, is for them to actually just be a top 3 team. I think it's super doable right now. Hanwha Life didn't look great in week 1, and KT Rolster is shitting the bed. This is the opportunity for DK to maintain that consistency and get themselves to Worlds easily. I think it's very doable, but a lot of it's going to come down to the mid-jungle duo. And then moving on to the 5th and final day of action here in the LCK in week number 2, and we kicked off the final day with another undefeated versus winless matchup. Gen.G taking on Bro, the best team in the LCK, taking on the worst team in the LCK, and it goes as anticipated. Gen.G picks up the strong 2-0, and this might be the most dominating series that we've seen in the LCK all year long. I can't remember a best of 3 that has gone this way in the LCK. There's been a few that have been non-competitive. There have been a lot of top team versus bottom team matchups that go exactly as anticipated throughout this year so far because the bottom teams are so bad. But man, this is up there. Like 8-0, Gen.G is looking genuinely unstoppable. I don't think that there is a team on planet Earth right now that can touch them. Like, truly, that is the difference between them and everyone else. It's a gigantic gap. Billy losing in 4 games is all of a sudden starting to look a lot better when they won a game twice in 2 different series against Gen.G. Obviously, jokes aside, like, that it just goes to show where they're at right now, where Gen.G is at and where, the LCK is at, because Gen.G is like so far and away the best team in the world, and it's not even remotely up for debate. At the current moment, all 5 of their players are playing like best in role, and it's just ridiculous. Player of the series is going to go to Canyon for me. Yeah, Jungle Canyon. Like, what do you want me to say? Like, he played Zyra and Karthus, and Youngjae had absolutely no answer. He played Zyra into Sejuani and had perma pressure. Like, it's just, it's ridiculous. There's nothing you can do here. He played Karthus, and he was up, like, 2k gold at 15 minutes. Like, it was genuinely something ridiculous. It just feels impossible to have games like this unless you are Canyon. The difference between literally any of these champions working and all of them just being okay is Canyon. That is the difference. He has single-handedly caused so many teams to pick Nidalee over the course of this split. It is genuinely unbelievable. It's really, really funny to watch. But yes, he's unbelievably good. He is ridiculous. There's nothing else I can say about Canyon that hasn't already been said. He is the jungler who's performing the best in the world right now. Whether you want to say it's him or Kanavi, you know, Kanavi's on a worse team, and so it's harder to get kind of an idea behind that. But yeah, Canyon's playing better in 2024. That's for damn sure. And that's with Kanavi having a hell of a year. So then you've got Lehens in the support position. He's going to be a pretty heavy contender for player of the week. That I will spoil. He was unbelievable this week as an engager, as a setup man. Obviously the Blitzcrank in the first series, the Nautilus and the Ornn here in the second series, Gen.G pulling out the Senna a couple of times. It's not necessarily something they've always wanted to go to. They've saved that for T1, but it still worked really well here. Chovy goes 11-2. The guy was like, you know, he had like a 28 KDA this week, something ridiculous. Keen, 2 games of Skarner. Once again, teams are just allowing Gen.G to have Skarner. That seems to be a little bit of a trend on the top side here. They're just untouchable. There's really no analysis that I can give that hasn't already been given. They're unbelievable. And then for Bro, again, there's no analysis I can give that hasn't already been given. This team sucks. They are bad everywhere on the board. Envy is their best player right now. Youngjae shows promise in terms of his ability to not make game-losing mistakes, and that's really the difference between him and everybody else in this team. But Morgan, Karis, Polu, they've all been horrible at the start of this split. Karis is going to get done of the series here. I mean, when you're going one-on-one against Chovy and you're picking Corki and Azir, your best case scenario is like down 50 CS. Like that is best case scenario in this particular circumstance. Karis couldn't even do that. This was really a demolition in the 1v1. Obviously, no one in the world is better in the 1v1 than Chovy. That's not debatable. You can argue whether or not Chovy's the best player in the world. I don't even think that's debatable personally, but if you want to argue that, you know, he's not the best player in the world, he's at least the best laner in the world. I don't even think that that's in the conversation, the zeitgeist, if you will. And Karis is not. Like, Karis is a horrible laner, and that was exploited here. He was obliterated in the 1v1. This was not... He did not hold up. The Lucian in game number 1, the Corki in game number 2. Chovy just obliterated Karis. It was not particularly close. Polu, like I said earlier, might be the worst player in the LCK. At the current moment, the dude is not even playable. They went from effort to this. This is a disaster for Bro. They don't have a single support in the organization that can play at an even remotely playable LCK level. Like I said, Envy is somehow the best player on this team, and Youngjae's, I guess, generally okay, but Morgan was horrible across this entire week. He has really not been good for Bro this split so far. You know, small sample size, only 4 series, but things are just collapsing around them. Bro is the worst team in the LCK. They are genuinely one of the worst tier 1 teams in the world. I don't think that they would be, like, I think they would be bottom 1 in North America. Like, I truly do believe that. I don't think that this is a team that would be competitive in any of the regions. I really think they are that bad. They are lacking in a lot of key pivotal areas, and I just don't really see a way for them to drag themselves out of this because they're in the LCK. Even teams like Nongshim, DRX, Fox, they've shown something. They've had 1 or 2 players that have looked relatively interesting. Bro has nothing going for them right now. This team is just trash. And then for Gen.G, they're the best team in the world. So yeah, this matchup went as expected. No big upsets here. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in the LCK, and it's a decently good one, or at least it was supposed to be. It's KT Rolster taking on Hanwha Life Esports, and HLE utterly obliterates them. We saw a lot of blowouts this week. Day number 5 in particular had 2. You know, Gen.G destroyed Bro. That was expected. This one, not so much in terms of the expectations. KT is just in free-fall mode. I don't really know what's going on with them right now. I know that their schedule has been tough. That is one thing I do want to give them as like a consolation prize. They are 0-4, 1-8, which is as disastrous as it could possibly get. I guess they could theoretically be 0-8, but that is a very light consolation prize that they've won a singular game. This team has been horrible across this split so far. They've shown absolutely no life. They've made consistent mistakes that are really easily punishable, and they have absolutely no way to do anything. They don't win in the early game. They don't win in the late game. They're not doing anything. KT just feels entirely mental boomed. They feel entirely lost, but if there is a saving grace, it's that they've had one of, if not the hardest schedule in the LCK up until this point. Their 4 losses losses are Damwon, the Kwangdong Freecs, who that doesn't look all that bad now, Gen.G, and Hanwha Life Esports. They've essentially exclusively played the best teams in the league. They're going to go on a stretch where they play FearX and DRX and Nongshim and Bro, and they're going to look better in those series. But if you can't beat any of the teams that you're competing against to go to Worlds, then I'm sorry, you're not going to be a contender. This team is just not living up to expectations at the current moment. They are playing the worst that they've played in a long time, and I, for one, am not surprised. Like, I hate to be that guy, but I predicted this at the beginning of the year. I know people hate it when I talk about the things I got right, but I gotta be honest, like, I didn't think this KT roster was going to work. Some of it worked a bit in spring. Their regular season was good. They found some consistencies, but they lose to Damwon because that consistency isn't real. It's never been real with these players, and all of a sudden now you're sitting here 0-4 because they've mental boomed. It's just how it goes with, you know, Pioshik and Beryl. I hate to say it. It's how it works with these two players, so... You know, that's my rant out of the way, but for Hanwha Life, they look awesome in week number 2. A really nice bounce back after a tumultuous week number 1 that really didn't go the way you planned. Player of the series here is once again going to go to Peanut in the jungle. He had a phenomenal week. And the Fiddlesticks in game number 2, yes, please. I want some more weird shit being brought out in pro play. And Fiddle actually fits the meta super well. AP carries are obviously super in style right now. We're seeing basically anything that can jungle and deal AP damage, you know, get put in that position. We see Zyra on the other side of this matchup from Pioshik. Fiddle fits this meta really nicely because he can attack a lot of different areas, and, you know, mobility is very crucial, but Fiddle shuts that down. If you land that fear, you set up for a lot of these high damage other carries like Yone or Tristana or Zeri or something else, or Draven. If you want to pull that out to then combo off of that, even something like the Skarner can then combo the CC off of Fiddle ultimate. It really is something that I would have expected to see more of. I just don't know how many players are experienced on Fiddlesticks, but Peanut was unbelievable this week. Goes deathless in this series, playing some aggressive champions. Really like to see that out of him. Zeka also going deathless, and he was just as valuable to the team overall. I think the Fiddle was definitely a bit more flashy, which is why Peanut gets player of the series, but Zeka was terrific. Completely gapped BDD on the other side of this matchup. Go watch the laning phases on these two games if you want an example of just how to punish a worse opponent. Like, it truly is unbelievable watching Zeka, you know, just obliterate BDD in the laning phase. Viper and Delight were excellent. Deft and Beryl constantly making mistakes. Beryl in particular walking up and dying for no reason. Doran completely gapping perfect on the top side. Hanwha just felt a lot more complete, not only in this series, but in this week, and that's all we really needed to see from them. And then for KT on the other side, as we've stated, there is just, it's disaster zone. It's panic button. 0-4 is as bad as it gets at the start of this split. Player or dud of the series could go to literally anyone here. I think it can go to Perfect, it can go to Pioshik, it can go to BDD, it can go to Beryl, it can go to Deft. Deft literally, as Zeri glided directly into the Fiddlesticks ultimate and died. Like, I don't really know what to tell you. Everybody on this team is not playing well right now. It feels like they are entirely mental boomed, and yes, it's possible for this team to recover, but it's going to take some mental fortitude. It's going to take some resilience, and I just don't know if these players have that. A dud of the series, if I had to choose one, is going to go to BDD. Like I said, he was probably the one who got gapped the most individually in terms of his matchup. Zeka just abused him in the mid lane. Like, I'm not going to do it justice. If you haven't watched the games, go watch the games, because, oh my god, like, Zeka, it felt like a challenger player playing a silver one. Like, truly, that's what it felt like. It truly was Zeka playing with the most amount of confidence in the world, and BDD just having none of it. On Corki, just giving over everything and dying even still. It really was miserable for him. He's been, like I said, average and slightly below average across this year. It's been disappointing to watch. Perfect was miserable. This is his worst series of the split by a large margin. He was really the only okay player in week 1 in his limited time. He was really not good here in this series. Pioshik has been awful this split. Deft and Beryl have been awful this split. There's just nothing else to say. Like, KTRX is not working out, and that has become abundantly clear. And then for HLE, you know, they still might be a top 3 team. Hell, with T1, they might even be a top 2 team if that team continues to have some issues. I'm not going to say it's definite, but HLE was a lot closer to making MSI than people remember, and that gap was supposed to be a lot closer. It didn't start out close, but this could be a pretty, you know, strong top 4 in the LCK if that ends up being the case, with, you know, Gen.G at the top and then T1, you know, kind of in second place. You've got Damwon, you've got DK, you've got Hanwha Life, you've got these teams that are fighting it out for those, you know, 3 and 4 spots. I think they're all really good teams. I think they all have ridiculous upside, and HLE did show a lot more of that this week. This is all we really wanted to see, and they gave it to us. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCK week number 2 overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, it would really mean a lot to me if you let me know down in the comments section below. But up on your screen now is going to be the updated standings after 2 weeks of action. Of course, we still do have at least one tie here in the LCK that will get broken very quickly as we continue to move along. But any ties, of course, are just broken alphabetically. No favoritism attempted to be shown in the standings here. In the first column to the right, you can see power rank. That's where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 10, and change as how that has changed from last week to this week, so we can go over the risers and the fallers. Not a ton of changes. KDF is going to jump all the way up to number 5. I shouldn't say jump all the way up. They're going to jump to 5, and KT is going to drop to 6. There's just no way to not put KT lower right now. They are not even playing like the 6th best team. They're not even playing close to the 6th best team. I just think that once their schedule gets easier, I think their record will improve. I think they will beat Bro, they will beat Fox, they will beat Nongshim, they will beat DRX. I expect them to be better. Also, top 4 not moving. There's no reason to move them after anything we saw this week, but 7 and 8 are also going to swap places. DRX is going to jump up to 7, Fox is going to fall down to 8. This might be a little bit rich because DRX did just lose to Nongshim, but I feel like their upside is higher than the other teams that are in this section. Fox has just shown nothing, and their inability to really be consistent at all, the lack of talent that they have on the team Clear and Execute are really underperforming, and Raptor took a step back this week. It kind of felt like I just had less faith in them than I do in DRX, so I think can win more games than them. You know, they have more opportunities to win games. I still think Nongshim and Bro are the 2 worst teams in the league in terms of performance, even after Nongshim's win, but who knows? Maybe they continue to build, you know, their own things up. Maybe KT continues to struggle. Maybe they go 0-16 or whatever. 0-18, I should say, and end up getting last place. I don't know. Like, these power rankings are definitely possible to change. They are subject to change as they are every single week, but let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with down in the comments. Did I move someone that you don't think deserved to go up or down? Did I not move someone that you think deserved to go up or down a lot more? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions on everything, but it's time to move in to my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week number 2. Player of the week, maybe shockingly, is going to go to Peanut, the jungler for Hanwha Life Esports. I do think individually he was probably the best player in the league this week, and I think his ability to control the game was the most important thing that HLE had going for them in a really strong 2-0 week. I think some people are going to underlook just how good he was in that first series, and I think he was obviously excellent in that final series against KT as well. Peanut, to me, very easy choice for player of the week. I shouldn't say easy because there were great options. Lahen's, Owner, if you wanted it to be either of them, if you wanted to give that award to either of them, I'm not going to argue with you. Lahen's deserved it. Owner deserved it. These are the 3 players that should be on this list as players of the week. I just gave it to Peanut because it felt like he was more immediately impactful towards his team, whereas both Lahen's and Owner had teammates that were playing incredibly well. Not that Peanut didn't, just that I thought he was the centralizing force in both of their series and basically every single one of their games. But, you know, it's kind of up to interpretation in that regard. So if you wanted Lahen's, if you wanted Owner, I understand. But those are my 3 player of the week nominations. And then dud of the week for me is going to go to Morgan. It could really go to the entirety of Bro. This team is an absolute disaster, but Morgan was horrible this week. Got outclassed in every single laning phase that he played. He was never useful outside of lane. Just a miserable week for Lord Morgan. I know there are fans out there, but this was a week to forget for Morgan fans. That is for sure. So Morgan's dud of the week. Peanut is player of the week, and that is going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCK on this channel, we post about all 4 of the major regions, the LCS, LEC, LCK, LPL, and the NACL, Tier 2 over in North America every single week on this channel. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.